"I married a penniless beggar. Her mother scrubs toilets and her father is a criminal," the groom announced at our wedding. 100 guests laughed, but then my father walked into the ballroom. "Now listen carefully, my dear son-in-law." The man froze. The wedding turned into a nightmare. Kalen Reed adjusted his expensive Italian-cut suit and surveyed the ballroom. Waiters in white gloves moved silently like shadows, pouring vintage champagne. Everything was going exactly as he had planned. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a demonstration of power, a declaration that Kalen, the 30-year-old sales director for a massive American corporation, had finally made it into the upper echelon. Next to him sat Nia Wells. She held her back perfectly straight, just as she had been taught, but Kalen could feel her hand tremble as she touched her glass. She was 23, though she looked younger, quiet, modest, with large, anxious eyes. The perfect facade. Kalen needed a wife just like her, silent, compliant, and one who looked at him like a god. She never asked unnecessary questions when he disappeared for meetings at high-end clubs, and she believed every word he said about his magnificent career prospects. "Smile," Kalen hissed through his teeth without turning his head. "Mr. Albright is watching us. If you look miserable, he'll think I forced you to be here." Nia obediently forced her lips into a smile. There was no joy in that smile, only submission. Kalen smirked smugly. He was convinced he had saved her, pulled her out of the dirt. At table number 3 sat Mr. Arthur Albright, the owner of the corporation where Kalen worked. He was an important, heavy-set man with a flushed face. He was telling his neighbors something while casually poking at a shrimp salad with his fork. The CEO's presence was Kalen's biggest victory. That's why he had orchestrated this entire spectacle. That's why he'd rented the most exclusive restaurant in Midtown Atlanta. That's why Kalen had taken out loans he didn't even want to think about at night. But Kalen tried not to dwell on the debts. Today, he was the king. He looked down at his hands. A platinum ring gleamed on his finger. He had bought it with the last few dollars left from the loan. He hadn't taken the loan from a bank. Banks had long since turned him down. Kalen's credit score had been ruined in his youth by foolish purchases of electronics and late payments. No, this time he was playing high stakes. 6 months ago, resolving that he needed a family and a luxurious life for his promotion, Kalen had contacted a private investor through an acquaintance. The intermediary, a slick guy named Darius, explained the terms. "The money comes fast and plentiful, but it's against the deed of your entire estate and on your honor." The interest rates were predatory, but Kalen was confident in himself. He calculated that after the wedding, by impressing Mr. Albright, he would secure the vice president position, where the salary, bonuses, and kickbacks were on a completely different level. He would pay everything back. Kalen borrowed $5 million. This money flowed into the rent for the ballroom, a designer dress for Nia. He insisted she look expensive, the high-end catering, and of course his new car, a black executive sedan now parked outside the restaurant, decorated with ribbons. The car was his pride. He told everyone he had bought it with his year-end bonus. "A toast to the happy couple," someone from the guests' party shouted. The ballroom joined in. 100 voices merged into a murmur. Kalen turned to Nia. She was rigid, her eyes, usually warm, now glassy. "Come on now," he whispered, pulling her roughly towards him by the waist. "Play your part." He kissed her publicly, hard and possessively. The room applauded. Kalen pulled away and winked at his buddy Derek, who was sitting nearby, and gave him a thumbs up. Derek was envious, and that warmed Kalen's heart more than the expensive cognac. The evening gained momentum. The guests, fueled by alcohol, took to the dance floor. Kalen felt like the master of life. He moved from table to table, accepting congratulations, patting people on the shoulder whom he wouldn't have dared approach before. Envelopes stuffed with cash piled up in a special velvet-lined chest. Kalen calculated in his head, "If everyone gave at least $1,000, I can cover part of the banquet debt tonight." But his greatest pleasure was Nia, specifically her utter insignificance in the face of his splendor. He knew her history by heart and savored every detail. She grew up without a father. Her mother had worked her whole life as a custodian at a shopping mall, scrubbing floors for minimum wage. They lived in a tiny apartment in the Heights, smelling of dampness and hopelessness. It was Darius, the intermediary, who had told him about Nia. He said there was a sweet, modest girl who had no big expectations and who would worship him. Kaylin checked it out. Indeed, Nia worked in a city library. She dressed plainly and spoke softly, the perfect victim, the perfect prop. He convinced her that he loved her. He showered her with flowers. Once he took her to Miami, also on a small loan. She blossomed. She saw him as her savior. She had no idea that for Kaylin, she was merely an accessory, a checkmark in the marital status column on his promotion application. It was time for the cake. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. The waiters rolled in a colossal, multi-tiered structure. Figures of the bride and groom stood at the top. The master of ceremonies, a snappy guy with a fixed smile, handed Kaylin the microphone. "And now, a word from the head of the new family," he announced. Kaylin stood up, slightly unsteady from the alcohol, but he felt a strange clarity in his mind. The desire to humiliate, to put someone down, boiled up in him. To show all these rich people that he, Kaylin Reed, was so grand that he could afford to marry anyone, even trash. It was a twisted logic, but in that moment it seemed like the height of brilliance. He let his gaze sweep across the room. Mr. Albright was listening attentively. This was his moment. "Dear friends, colleagues, partners," Kaylin's voice, amplified by the speakers, echoed through the hall. "Thank you for coming to share in my triumph. Yes, my triumph. Today, I got married." He paused, relishing the silence. Nia sat with her head bowed. "Many of you asked me, 'Kaylin, why her?'" He theatrically pointed at his wife. "Why would a successful, promising man like me choose this plain Jane?" Confusion hung in the air. Someone nervously chuckled. Mr. Albright's smile faded. "I'll tell you," Kaylin shouted, fully intoxicated, "because I can afford to. I'm a self-made man and I decided to indulge in a little charity." "Look at her. Do you know who she is?" Nia slowly lifted her head. Something had changed in her expression. The fear was gone. A strange, icy emptiness had appeared, but Kaylin didn't notice. "Her mother has scrubbed toilets in the mall her entire life," Kaylin yelled, his face contorted in a malicious grin. "Imagine that! My mother-in-law is a professional toilet scrubber, and her father, oh, that's a story in itself. Daddy is an ex-con, a criminal who's been rotting in a federal pen for 15 years. I don't even know what he's in for, and I don't want to know. Probably stole a sack of potatoes." The silence in the room was deafening. The guests looked at each other. This wasn't just embarrassing, it was disgusting. But Kaylin couldn't stop. He was under a spell. "I pulled her out of poverty," he continued, pacing with the microphone. "I cleaned her up, dressed her in silk. I gave her a name. I gave her a life. And everyone should know, Kaylin Reed is so great that he can marry the daughter of a criminal and a cleaning lady and make something of her. Let's drink to my generosity." He raised his glass, expecting cheers, but the room was silent. Even the drunken Derek hid his eyes. Mr. Albright slowly placed his napkin on the table and frowned. Kaylin was confused for a second. Why weren't they laughing? It was funny. He was the benefactor. This was classic. "What's not funny?" he barked into the microphone. "Nia, stand up. Show yourself to the people. They need to see who I made happy." Nia slowly and elegantly stood up. She wasn't crying. There was no trace of the hysteria Kaylin had both feared and secretly wanted. She was calm, frighteningly calm. "Are you done?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, but thanks to the good acoustics, everyone heard her. "What?" Kaylin was taken aback. "How dare you open your mouth? I told you!" At that moment, the massive mahogany doors of the restaurant swung open with a crash, as if struck by a battering ram. All heads turned to the entrance. A man stood in the opening. He was around 60, but he looked like a fortress. His broad shoulders filled out an impeccable dark blue suit that probably cost as much as Kaylin's entire wedding. His gray hair was neatly combed back. His face, hardened by weather, with deep creases around his mouth, radiated absolute devastating authority. Two burly men, clearly security, appeared behind him, but they remained by the door. The man entered the hall alone. He strode confidently down the aisle like a landlord, leaning heavily on a cane whose silver head was shaped like a wolf's skull. The tapping of the cane on the hardwood floor, clack, 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 set the rhythm in the dead silence. Kaylin froze, the microphone still in his hand. He didn't know this man, but the survival instinct that had been dormant for an hour suddenly wailed like a siren. Such a wave of danger emanated from this older gentleman that Kaylin wanted to hide under the table. The man walked up to the bridal table. He didn't look at Kaylin, he only looked at Nia. "Daddy," Nia said softly. A warmth in her voice that Kaylin had never heard before resonated in the room. The guests gasped. Kaylin's knees buckled. "Daddy? The criminal who was rotting in prison for a sack of potatoes? This respectable gentleman who radiated massive wealth and power at first glance? Hello, my daughter." The man's voice was deep and rolling. "Pardon the delay. Traffic at the airport was a nightmare." He turned his gaze to Kaylin, and in that look was so much coldness that Kaylin felt a trickle of cold sweat run down his back. "And this must be the so-called benefactor?" the man asked, nodding toward the groom. Kaylin tried to force a smile, but his facial muscles failed him. "And who are you?" he croaked into the microphone he had forgotten to put down. The man grinned. It was a terrifying grin. "I am the supposed criminal rotting in prison, Isaiah Thorne. Have you heard of me?" Kaylin frantically searched his memory. Thorne. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but from where? Suddenly, Mr. Albright rose from his seat. The face of Kaylin's boss was as white as the tablecloth. He hurried away from the table, approaching Nia's father almost subserviently. "Mr. Thorne," he stammered, "what an honor! We didn't know. If we had known that Ms. Wells was your daughter—" Isaiah Thorne dismissively waved his hand, cutting off the flood of flattery. "Relax, Arthur. No need to get worked up. I'm not here for business. I'm here for family and financial matters." He slowly circled the table and stood next to the master of ceremonies, who was clutching his script binder in terror. Isaiah Thorne extended his hand, and the master of ceremonies silently handed him the second microphone. "Everyone, take a seat," Nia's father commanded calmly. No one dared to disobey. Even the waiters froze against the walls. "So, young man," Isaiah Thorne turned his entire body toward Kaylin, "you have just publicly humiliated my daughter in front of 100 witnesses. You called my wife, who, by the way, owns a chain of national cleaning and facility management franchises, a business she built from scratch with her own 2 hands, a toilet scrubber. That was careless. But that is a matter of morality. I, on the other hand, am a businessman." He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. Kaylin tracked his hand like a rabbit watching a snake. He thought the man was going to pull out a weapon, but Isaiah Thorne pulled out a 4 times folded sheet of paper. "Did you take out a loan for this wedding, Kaylin?" he asked penetratingly. "That's my private business," Kaylin mumbled, trying to retain a shred of dignity. "Mistake. It is now my business." Isaiah Thorne unfolded the sheet. "Loan agreement number 45B. Amount, $5 million. Repayment due upon the creditor's first demand. Collateral, car, apartment, and all movable and immovable assets. Debtor's signature. Read, Kaylin." "Do you recognize this paper?" Kaylin paled. "Where did you get that? I took the money from Darius, a private investor." "Darius is my employee," Isaiah Thorne interrupted. "He manages one of my small venture funds. And the private investor? That's me. I lend money at interest to those who want to appear richer than they are. I enjoy observing human foolishness, you see. But when Darius brought me the dossier of the next client and I saw your bride's last name, I was very surprised." Nia's father stepped closer. Now they were standing face to face. "I wasn't in prison, my boy. Well, technically, yes, very briefly in the 90s. Since then, I built an empire, and Nia and I had an arrangement. She wanted to find a man who loved her, not my money. That's why she lived modestly, worked at the library, and wore simple clothes. We were testing you, Kaylin." There was total silence in the ballroom. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. "I was against it," Isaiah Thorne continued. "I saw right away that you were rotten, but my daughter insisted. He's a good man, Dad. He loves me. He just wants to look cool. She asked me not to interfere. I agreed, but I made one condition. If you hurt her, even with a single word, if you show your true nature, I will destroy you." Kaylin swallowed. His mouth was dry. "And now you've shown it." Isaiah Thorne gestured toward the hall. "You didn't just insult her. You trampled her. You wanted to elevate yourself at the expense of a woman you thought was weak. A big mistake." He looked sternly at Kaylin. "According to paragraph 41 of our contract, the creditor has the right to demand immediate full repayment of the debt if circumstances arise that endanger the repayment of the funds. And I see that you are an idiot, and idiots don't pay back money. Therefore, I demand immediate repayment of the debt." I don't have it right now," Kaylin stammered. "You know I spent it on the wedding." "I know," Isaiah Thorne nodded. "You spent my money to impress my acquaintances. Funny, right? But the money isn't here, so the collateral clause comes into effect." He held out his open hand. "The car keys." "What?" Kaylin stumbled backward a step. "The car keys," Isaiah Thorne repeated, and his voice was now laced with steel. "From the sedan parked at the entrance. That covers about half the debt, considering depreciation, and the fact that you already scratched the rim while parking." "But that's my car!" Kaylin shrieked. "I'm not giving it up!" Isaiah Thorne snapped his fingers. The two security men by the door instantly appeared beside him. They didn't hit Kaylin. One simply pressed hard on a pressure point on his shoulder, and the groom gasped, bending forward. "Don't move, debtor," Isaiah Thorne threw in coldly. "You still owe me $2.5 million. Your apartment, I checked, is mortgaged. I can't take it right now. The bank gets first dibs. But I will pay off your debt to the bank tomorrow. And believe me, I will make sure you are evicted from that apartment within 1 week." Kaylin stared at him in horror. His entire world, which he had so painstakingly built, collapsed like a house of cards within minutes. "Nia." Isaiah Thorne turned to his daughter. "Are you ready?" Nia looked at Kaylin. There was neither malice nor hatred in her gaze, only disgust, as if she were looking at a crushed cockroach. "Yes, Daddy. I understood everything when the toast came." She pulled off her wedding ring. The gold clinked onto the plate. "The dress was bought with your money too, Daddy. Take it as part of the debt." "Good girl," her father nodded. Nia picked up her purse and walked to her father. She didn't look like a plain Jane now. She looked like a real princess, proud and untouchable. Kaylin stood in the middle of the ballroom, alone, without a car, without money, without a wife, with a massive debt he could never repay to a man like Thorne. The guests began to rise. Mr. Albright was the first. "Mr. Thorne," he called out, "allow me to escort you. And Mrs. Wells, I have a top management position open. I've long been looking for someone with your daughter's pedigree." "We'll discuss that, Arthur," Thorne shot back, without turning around. "In the meantime, deal with your employee. I don't think someone with such financial impropriety can work in the sales department." "You're fired!" Mr. Albright barked at Kaylin, full of hatred. "Reed, have your resignation on my desk tomorrow, and don't ever show your face here again. You've embarrassed me in front of respected people." The guests streamed toward the exit. No one looked at Kaylin. People tried to rush past him as if he were contagious. Bankrupt, loser, peasant, echoed from all sides. The same Derek who had given him a thumbs up half an hour earlier now loudly told someone that he had always known Kaylin was nothing but a loudmouth and a zero. After 5 minutes, the ballroom emptied. Only the waiters remained, silently beginning to clear the untouched delicacies from the tables. Kalen sank into a chair. He stared at the empty glass with Nia's lipstick stain. His ears were ringing. The restaurant manager approached him. "Excuse me," he said dryly. "The banquet is only half paid for. Mr. Thorne said the balance is the responsibility of the person who placed the order. That's you. You still owe us $15,000 for the alcohol and supplemental services." Kalen raised his cloudy eyes. "I don't have any money." "Then we call the police," the manager replied indifferently, picking up his phone. That was the longest night of Kalen's life. The officers who arrived at the restaurant showed not a single ounce of sympathy. To them, he was just another big talker who tried to live above his means. He, in his expensive tuxedo that now reeked of sweat and fear, was loaded into the patrol car in front of the kitchen staff. Cooks and cleaning women looked at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. One whispered to the other, and both laughed as they watched the once arrogant gentleman now sitting handcuffed in the back of the police cruiser. Every minute in the cell, smelling of institutional dampness and foreign despair, seemed like an eternity. He sat on the hard bench in the holding room, listening to the drunken ramblings of a homeless man next door, muttering about lost treasures and the world's injustice. Kalen tried to call someone. He dialed the number for Derek, his only, or so he thought, friend, with whom he'd spent nights in clubs. But Derek's phone was off. Several more attempts followed to reach those he considered his circle. One buddy hung up. Another sent a message. "Don't call me anymore, Kalen. Mr. Albright made it clear it's better not to have contact with you. You're toxic now. Sorry, nothing personal." The world he had so meticulously constructed vanished faster than cigarette smoke. In the morning, he was released on bail. The restaurant manager had filed a complaint for fraud, but the investigator, an older, mustachioed detective, hinted to Kalen that the case could be closed by amicable settlement if he paid the debt within 3 days. "But you won't, will you?" he added, surveying Kalen with a look of tired cynicism. Kalen stepped out onto the street. The morning was gray, rainy, and cold. He stood on the precinct steps in a wrinkled tuxedo that yesterday had seemed the height of elegance and now looked like pitiful rags. He had lost his bow tie somewhere in the cell. His phone was finally dead. He didn't have a penny in his pocket. His luxurious black sedan, the symbol of his success and fake wealth, had been seized by Thorne. He didn't have spare keys to the apartment either. He had given them to Nia before the wedding so she could move her things, and his own spares were in the glove compartment of the car that was now gone forever. Kalen trudged away on foot. It was 6 miles to his luxury complex, which he had once proudly called home. He walked through puddles in his patent leather shoes, which were completely soaked, and rubbed his feet raw. Passing cars splashed him with dirt from the tires. People at the bus stops avoided the strange dirty guy in the expensive but now rumpled suit. One thought hammered in his head. This is a mistake. This can't be happening. I'm going to wake up and everything will be as it was. This is just a bad dream. But when he reached his building, the doorman, the always subservient Mr. Jenkins, who used to bend over backwards to greet him, blocked his way. "Sir, you can't go in," he said dryly, without opening the electronic turnstile. There was no trace of the former reverence in his voice, only distance. "Are you out of your mind, Mr. Jenkins?" Kalen croaked, his throat tight with despair and exhaustion. "I live here. That's my apartment." "There's a team working up there right now. They're moving out Ms. Wells' things." The doorman turned away, avoiding direct eye contact. "And there are people from the bank and the bailiffs, too. Everything is legal." Kalen felt the ground literally sink beneath his feet. Thorne hadn't been joking. He acted with the speed of a whirlwind, with cold, calculated ruthlessness. His words, that he would destroy Kalen, were not an empty threat. Kalen, gathering his last strength, shoved the doorman aside, ignored his shouts, and rushed to the elevator. He pushed the button, and the elevator, as if mocking him, slowly began to descend. Finally, he stormed into his 5th-floor apartment, whose door was wide open. Chaos reigned inside. Two burly men in work clothes with expressionless faces were neatly but quickly packing everything of value into boxes: the plasma TV, the expensive stereo system, the artwork Kaylin had bought for the image, the Italian furniture. In the center of the living room stood a man in a gray suit. He was a lawyer, as it turned out later. He held a tablet in his hands, in which Kaylin's entire fate seemed sealed. "Mr. Reed," he asked, without looking at Kaylin. His voice was dry and official. "You violated the terms of the mortgage agreement by providing false information about your income. Furthermore, your debt to the bank has been acquired by Vector Invest, a company owned by Mr. Thorne. Given the payment defaults and the discovery of fraud in obtaining the loan, we conducted a full audit, and all your clean certifications turned out to be forgeries. The bank has initiated proceedings for immediate contract termination." "What fake certifications?" Kaylin screamed, his voice cracked. "I work as a department head. I have a regular salary." "You no longer work there," the lawyer replied calmly, finally lifting his gaze, which held cold satisfaction. "The termination was signed this morning, effective immediately, due to loss of trust. So you have no official income. The apartment is being sealed. You have 1 hour to collect your personal belongings. Only clothing and hygiene articles. Electronics, furniture, and furnishings must not be touched. They will be auctioned to cover the debt." Kaylin sank onto the sofa, but he was immediately told to stand up because the sofa had to be carried away. He stood in the middle of the empty, echoing room, watching his life, his dreams, his future, being packed into cardboard boxes and carried away. His world, which he had so carefully built on lies and arrogance, collapsed. He remembered the first time he brought Naya here, how proudly he showed her the view of the city from the window, lying at his feet, how she shyly and admiringly asked, "Kaylin, does all this really belong to you?" And he laughed, hugged her, and said with a self-satisfied grin, "Of course, dummy. I'm the king of this world, and now you're my queen." Now, he was the king of a cardboard box. In it, he stowed a few pairs of jeans, some sweaters, socks, and his lucky jacket, which now seemed like a mockery. On top, he threw the charging cable for his cell phone. That was all he had. He left the apartment, which was no longer his, and the door slammed shut behind him with a dry, final sound. For the first week, Kaylin stayed with random acquaintances, lying to them that he was undergoing a temporary renovation and was just crashing there. He tried to maintain his composure and project the image of the former successful Kaylin, but the city was small, and the rumors, fueled by the financial news of Reed's sudden collapse, spread like wildfire. The story of how Kaylin Reed was humiliated at his own wedding, publicly insulted the daughter of an oligarch, and lost everything became the main gossip in business circles. Friends stopped taking his calls. When Kaylin showed up at the office to apologize to Mr. Albright, the security guards wouldn't even let him across the threshold, demonstratively ignoring his pleas. His work certificate was handed to him on the street like alms. Stamped on it was the shameful notation, "Terminated for loss of trust due to systematic violation of work duties and reputational risks to the company." This entry was a verdict. He tried to apply to competitors. He was a good salesman. He could persuade. He could manipulate. He sent hundreds of resumes and called all his contacts. But at interviews, as soon as recruiters saw his name or recognized him, their faces changed. The smiles vanished, replaced by distrust or open contempt. "Reed? The guy who insulted Thorne?" a director of a large company asked, examining Kaylin with interest, as if he were an exotic animal in a zoo. "Sorry, we don't need trouble. Mr. Thorne is an influential man. He can shut off our entire supply chain with one phone call. You're on the blacklist, my boy, all over the city, and I don't think it stops here." 1 week followed another. His money ran out on the third day. Selling his gold watch, a gift to himself for his 30th birthday, brought some cash. But the pawn shop gave him only 1/3 of the actual value, taking advantage of Kaylin's desperation not to haggle. That money went toward paying off the restaurant bill to avoid a criminal charge for fraud. He felt he was starting to slide, and it was impossible to stop the fall. Only one option remained, the one Kalen feared the most. He stood in front of the door of the old subsidized housing project on the south side, the neighborhood he had often laughed at and called the projects. It smelled of frying onions, old furniture, and cat urine here. The door was covered with worn, faded synthetic leather from which the stuffing spilled out. He pressed the doorbell. The bell rang shrilly and desperately, as if waking up his old childhood fears. An older woman in a faded cotton dress opened the door. Her wrinkled face was tired but kind and full of eternal worry. Her eyes, the color of autumn leaves, were the same as his. "Kalen," she whispered, wringing her hands as if to ward off misfortune. "My boy, what's wrong? What brings you here?" This was his mother, the simple woman he was so ashamed of that he hadn't invited her to his luxurious wedding. He had lied, saying the wedding was small, somewhere abroad, just the two of them, so as not to burden her. In reality, he was afraid that the sight of her, the way she spoke, her cheap but clean dress, would ruin his image in front of the rich guests. "Mama," Kalen lowered his gaze, feeling shame creep into his face. He couldn't look at her. "Can I come in?" She understood everything immediately. Mothers always understand everything. She saw his dead look, his trembling hands, his pathetic duffel bag of belongings, and his emaciated face. She asked no questions. She didn't reproach him. She simply stepped aside, pulling the door wide open, letting him into the warmth of her small, cozy world. "Come in, my boy. I made some hot stew." Kalen sat in the small kitchen, where nothing had changed in the 10 years since he had moved out and left her alone. The same plastic tablecloth with hot tea stains, the same faded curtains with flowers, the same creaky chair. He ate the soup, and tears dripped right into the bowl, mixing with the dark broth. He cried like a child, loudly, sobbing without shame. For the first time in many years, he allowed himself to be weak. His mother stroked his head, just like in childhood, running her wrinkled hand through his hair. "It's okay, Kalen. It's okay. The most important thing is that you're alive. Money comes and goes. Everything will be fine." She didn't know the extent of the disaster. She knew nothing of the $5 million in debt, which had now swelled to $7 million with penalties and interest. She knew nothing of Isaiah Thorne and his promise to destroy him. She just saw her son, broken and unhappy. Kalen stayed with his mother, sleeping on the old, saggy, fold-out couch whose springs jabbed his ribs. Every morning, he heard his mother counting pennies to buy bread, milk, and her cheap blood pressure medication. He was burning with unbearable shame. Before, he had sent her $50 a month, considering himself a great benefactor, a generous son, while he himself spent $500 in a bar in a single evening without a second thought. Now he was living off her small pension. 1 month passed. Kalen finally found work as a warehouse worker at a vegetable wholesale market outside the city. No record in the employment file. Paid in cash at the end of every shift. Waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning, heavy physical labor until evening. His back ached unbearably. His hands were covered with calluses and abrasions that burned at night. But this was the only job where no one asked about his last name, his past, or his references, where the most important things were strong hands and endurance. He hauled sacks of potatoes, crates of carrots, and boxes of cabbage. The smell of rotten vegetables, dampness, and earth ate into his clothes, his skin, and his hair. It was impossible to wash away. If his former colleagues, his friends from the better society, had seen him now, they probably wouldn't have recognized him. The spoiled, smug king had become a tired, dirty worker with a faded look and slumped shoulders. In the evenings, lying on the old sofa, staring at the ceiling, he replayed the wedding day, his speech, in his mind. Every word burned him like hot iron. Toilet scrubber. Criminal. He remembered Nia's face when he spoke those words. Her calmness, which he had mistaken for submission, now seemed like a harbinger of the storm. Her eyes were full of icy emptiness. He thought about Nia, about how blind he had been. He remembered their quiet evenings when she cooked him dinner, picked him up from work, ironed his shirts, and tried to make his life comfortable. She had actually loved him, or at least believed in him. She had tolerated his arrogance, his coldness, his constant pursuit of external glamour. She saw the man in him that he had killed in himself, or perhaps who had never existed. One day he couldn't take it anymore. The feeling of guilt and the burning desire to somehow atone for his sin, or perhaps just the desperate hope for a miracle, drove him. He decided to find her. He had to apologize, not to get the money or status back, but simply to ease his soul, to receive at least a little forgiveness. He knew the address of Thorne's corporate headquarters, the huge glass skyscraper downtown that shimmered in the rays of the setting sun seemed like an impenetrable fortress. Kalen arrived there after his shift, changed into reasonably clean clothes his mother had washed. But the smell of the vegetable market, a mixture of rotten leeks, dampness, and soil, had penetrated so deeply into his skin that no soap helped. The security guards at the entrance naturally wouldn't let him in. A young, burly man with a clean-shaven face blocked his way. "I need to see Miss Nia Thorne," Kalen insisted, feeling infinitely pathetic. "It's a personal matter. Tell her it's Reed." The guard, looking at him with distaste, smirked. "Reed? Oh, the clown. We have orders to toss you out. Beat it before we call the cops and don't make a scene." "Please," Kalen pleaded, pressing himself against the glass door. "Just give her a note. A single note." At that moment, a group of people emerged from the elevator, heading for the exit. Nia was walking in the center. She had changed. There was no plain Jane anymore, no timid girl with anxious eyes. She was wearing a severe but elegant business suit, perfectly tailored to her figure. Her hair was styled in a chic, expensive updo. A delicate, exquisite scent emanated from her. She walked confidently, discussing something with two assistants who listened to her respectfully. She looked like a real businesswoman, her father's daughter, worthy of his company. There was strength and determination in her movements. Kalen rushed toward the turnstile, forgetting everything around him. "Nia! Nia!" She stopped and slowly turned her head, as if drawn by an unpleasant but indistinct sound. She saw him. Kalen pressed himself against the thick, armored glass that separated him from her new world. "Nia, I'm sorry," he shouted. His voice was hoarse and desperate. "I was an idiot. I understand everything, please." She came closer. The guards stepped back but remained vigilant, ready to react instantly. Between them lay the bulletproof glass, which became a metaphor for the chasm that now separated them. Nia looked at him calmly. There was no hatred in her eyes, not even schadenfreude. This was worse. There was complete, absolute indifference. That is how one looks at an empty spot, at furniture, at a crushed insect, at something utterly meaningless. To her, he wasn't a person, but just an unpleasant memory she wanted to forget. "Why did you come, Kalen?" she asked. Her voice, muffled by the glass, was cold and distant. "I wanted to say I didn't know. I love you," he lied out of habit, desperately clinging to the words he had once said so easily, but he immediately fell silent. No, he hadn't loved her then. But now, having lost everything, he suddenly understood that she had been the only bright, pure spot in his life, one he had defiled himself. "Nia, give me a chance, please. I'll make everything right. I'll pay back the debt. Every dollar." She smiled sadly, almost pityingly. It wasn't a smile of joy, but rather of bitter insight. "You will pay back the debt, Kalen. My father's lawyers will make sure of that, and you've already paid him back a lot, believe me. But there are no more chances. You didn't kill everything when you found out who my father was, or even when I lived modestly. You killed everything when you decided you could trample on a person who seemed weaker than you, when you decided you could play with the feelings of others for your momentary advantage, for your boastfulness. That was inside you all along, Kalen. I just didn't want to see it for too long." She paused, looking at his pale, sunken face. A shadow of regret flitted across her eyes but vanished immediately. "You know, I was ready to spend my whole life with you in the mortgage department, working at the library, building our life together, stone by stone. I never asked my father for money. I believed in you. I actually saw potential in you. But you were an empty shell, beautiful packaging, but rot inside. And that can't be repaired, Kaylin." She turned and walked toward the exit, waving off her assistants who tried to speak to her. "Nia!" he screamed, hitting the glass desperately with his fist. But it was solid. It didn't yield to his weak blow. She didn't turn around. She got into the same black SUV that Kaylin had once admired so much, and which now belonged to her. The car drove silently away, taking her far from him. The court hearing for the debt took place without his participation. The decision was predictable. He was obligated to pay the entire sum with interest, which now amounted to almost $7.5 million. The bailiffs even seized his mother's small, old property, the only asset they had left. His mother cried for a week. Her already weak heart began to have problems. Kaylin hated himself so much that he sometimes thought about jumping from the bridge they crossed on the way to work, but cowardice held him back. He wanted to live, even this pathetic, meaningless life. The work as a warehouse worker became increasingly difficult. His health, undermined by stress, poor nutrition, and lack of rest, began to fail. The constant drafts in the warehouse and the loads he hauled took their toll. He lost weight. His face was gaunt. He developed painful dark circles under his eyes, and a cough became his constant companion. He was only 31, but he felt broken. One evening, returning home, chilled to the bone and tired, he ran into Derek. His former best friend was coming out of an expensive bar, accompanied by an excited, laughing woman decked in gold. Kaylin wanted to pass by, pulling his cap lower over his face to avoid being recognized. But Derek noticed him. "Well, well, who do my eyes see?" Derek slurred drunkenly. His voice was loud and unpleasant. "Kaylin, king of the world, still slumming it with the common folk?" Kaylin stopped. He could smell the dampness and rotten vegetables on himself. "Hey, Derek, how's it going? How's the oligarch life?" Derek came closer. He smelled of expensive cologne mixed with alcohol. He contemptuously looked Kaylin up and down. "I heard you're slinging potatoes at the produce market now. Career progress. You earned that, I think." The woman standing next to Derek giggled, covering her mouth with a hand whose nails were long and manicured. "Derek, lend me some money," Kaylin said softly, feeling his pride crushed again. "My mother needs medicine. Her heart is acting up again. She's really sick." The smile vanished from Derek's face, replaced by a look of disgust. "Money for you? You, my friend, ruined my wedding night with your circus. I wanted to meet important people there, and because of you, we were all covered in dirt. You're a pariah now. If I give you even $1, Mr. Albright will tear me apart, and I'll be out just like you. Get lost, bum. Don't embarrass me." Derek shoved Kaylin's shoulder. Kaylin stumbled, his sick legs losing balance, and he fell into the dirty snow, landing right in a puddle. Derek stepped over him as if he were trash and walked toward the waiting taxi, laughing loudly and telling the woman something about the scum. Kaylin lay in the cold, sticky snow, looking up at the indifferent, star-filled sky through the falling snowflakes. The cold crept under his thin down jacket, enveloping his whole body. He didn't feel pain from the fall. He suffered from what he had seen in the eyes of his former friend. He had created this world himself, a world where only money and boasting mattered. And now that world had crushed him, spat him out, and turned its back on him. He was a nobody, less than nobody. He was trash. He stood up, brushing the dirty snow from his clothes, but the feeling of humiliation remained. He dragged himself home, where only one truly loving soul was waiting for him. At home, his mother gave him hot tea with jam and covered him with an old woolen blanket. "It's okay, my boy," she whispered, stroking his head. "God is patient, and He commanded us to be the same. The most important thing is that you become a genuinely good man." Had he become a man? Kaylin didn't know. He only felt emptiness and pain. Another year passed. Kaylin and Nia's wedding now seemed not just a thing of the past, but a different life that belonged to someone else. Kaylin turned 32. His life had turned into a gray, joyless routine. He continued to work at the produce market, gradually getting used to the physical labor and the meager wages. During this time, he had completely lost all hope of restoring his former status. His phone was cut off for non-payment. The internet was a luxury. The TV in his mother's room showed 3 channels. The world he once knew existed somewhere far away, in other news, in other conversations, but not in his reality. He began to help his mother around the house, carrying heavy shopping bags, fixing the old faucets. He saw how happy she was about simple things, fresh bread, sunny weather, his presence, and he was ashamed that he had neglected her before, that he considered her not status appropriate for his life. Now she was his only support, his only light in the deepest darkness. The debt to Thorne continued to hang over him like the sword of Damocles. Bailiffs seized every dollar Kalin officially tried to earn. That's why he worked off the books, earning alms that barely covered food and utility bills. His mother's small property, although seized, had not yet been sold. Kalin knew it was only a matter of time. He constantly had nightmares. Sometimes he was back at the wedding shouting his humiliating words, and the room was laughing. Sometimes he drowned in a mountain of cash envelopes that turned into dirty rags. He began to understand the true value of things, not the gold ring, but the warmth of his mother's hand, not the expensive car, but the ability to simply move around without back pain, not the social gatherings, but a quiet evening at home. But this realization came at an unbearably high price. One cold, wet day, when the gusty wind whipped prickly snow and rain into his face, Kalin was heading to work. He stood at the bus stop, shivering in his thin, worn-down jacket. The cold crept into his bones. His toes in his soaked shoes were numb. He felt old and broken, though he was only 32. A black, spotlessly clean SUV, huge and powerful like a beast, pulled up to the stop. It stopped at the traffic light directly across from Kalin. The car was one of the newest models. Its price equaled several of Kalin's lifetimes. Kalin involuntarily stared. A beautiful car. He had once owned one just like it, only for one day. But he had owned it. He remembered that feeling of omnipotence that the car gave him. Now he looked at it as something from another world, unreachable and alien. The passenger side window smoothly, silently lowered. It revealed the warm, cozy interior. Kalin squinted against the flying snow to make something out. Inside, illuminated by the soft dashboard light, sat a woman. She was laughing as she looked at the man driving. He wasn't old, but a sharp-looking man with a kind, open face. He was saying something to her, and she lovingly touched his hand on the steering wheel. She was wearing an expensive, elegant fur coat. Large diamond earrings sparkled in her ears, and a delicate necklace rested on her neck. She looked happy, calm, and incredibly confident. Her beauty had blossomed, becoming more mature and profound. It was Nia. She turned her head, and their eyes met across the dividing lanes and the insurmountable abyss of their life circumstances. Kalin froze. His heart skipped a beat. He wanted to rush to the car, to shout, to beg for forgiveness, to ask for help, to do anything so that she would notice him, so that she would see his pain, his remorse, anything to get back even a tiny piece of his past. Nia looked at him for a few seconds. There was no recognition in her eyes. She looked at him like a part of the street landscape, like a snowdrift, like a lamppost, like a failure shivering from the cold at the bus stop whose face had vanished from her memory, like dust wiped from lacquered furniture. She had completely erased him. To her, he was an absolute stranger, an uninteresting object not even worth a thought. There was only a slight, fleeting curiosity about a stranger in her eyes, which immediately faded. Then she calmly turned away and continued her conversation with her companion, smiling at him. The window slid smoothly and silently up, cutting Kalin off from the world, the warmth, the love, the happiness, and the money. The traffic light turned green. The SUV sped away. The powerful tires spun up a cloud of dirty snow dust that struck Kalen in the face, clouding his eyes. He felt the finest particles of ice and dirt settle on his lips, leaving a bitter, unpleasant aftertaste. Kalen remained standing, dirty, chilled, and uninteresting to anyone. His body trembled not only from the cold, but also from the feeling of his complete insignificance. He wiped his wet face with his sleeve, but it only made it worse. Now, streaks of tears, snow, and dirt were smeared across his face. An old, rusty bus drove up. The doors hissed open, a sound like the sigh of a dying animal, or perhaps the long groan of a weary world. "Well, are you getting on or not? What are you standing there like a statue for?" the corpulent, perpetually dissatisfied driver snapped. She leaned out, enveloping him in the smell of cheap coffee and cigarettes. Kalen obediently stepped into the interior, which smelled of gasoline, alcohol, foreign exhaustion, and poverty. He fumbled in his pocket for change for the fare. Exactly $3. That was all he had. The bus slowly, heavily pulled away, carrying him into the gray, hopeless life he had chosen for himself the moment he grabbed the microphone to laugh at another person, at the one he believed was beneath him. The retribution was long-lasting, and it seemed to him that it was only just beginning, with no end in sight. He was forever indebted to life, which had taken everything he valued and left him only with lessons he now had to learn on his own skin. If you liked this story and want to hear more, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. If you'd like to support me, you can do it through Super Thanks. It would mean a lot. In the comments, tell me which city you're watching from and what time it is, so I can see how far my story reaches. I've added 2 more life stories on the screen just for you. Click one now, and let's keep spending time together. Much love. See you soon.